Hello and welcome everyone to week 3 of our seminar series, Education's Digital Future, Equity by Design. My name is Amber Levinson. I'm a research associate with the Tilos initiative here at Stanford. This week we're going to be talking about equity and innovation, lessons from the Department of Education. And we are so excited to be presenting truly wonderful speakers for you tonight in just a few minutes. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, if you're here for the first time, raise your hand. Awesome. A lot of people, a lot of returners and a lot of new people. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, the seminar series is dedicated to issues at the intersection of equity, technology, and learning. It's free and open to the public, and we also have both Stanford students and working educators enrolled for units. Tilos is an initiative at the Stanford Graduate School of Education dedicated to advancing equity by creating and investigating ways that technology can increase learning opportunities for pre-K to 12 learners, families, and educators. And this seminar is one way that we are fostering discussion around these issues. Tilos is an acronym, but it's also a Greek word that we chose because it means end or purpose, the ultimate object or aim. And we chose this word because it's the kind of intentionality that we want to see when we integrate technology to education. And Tilos is funded by a generous gift from the Nomalini Olivier family. And the seminar itself is also hosted in partnership with Digital Promise, Silicon Valley Education Foundation, and the Center to Support Excellence in Teaching. And part of our goal, so we really encourage you to tweet during the seminar. Our hashtag is EDF Equity. And part of our goal of the seminar is to bring together and facilitate conversations across sectors. So I'd really like to hear who we have in the audience tonight. Please raise your hand if you're a student. Okay, a few students. University faculty or staff. Cool. Classroom educators. Excellent. School or district administrators. Great. Industry professionals. Awesome. Nonprofit professionals. A lot of you too. Wonderful. Parents. Other community members. Fantastic. Great. Everyone give yourselves a round of applause for being here Monday night. All right. So each week we are happy to have lightning talks to open each of our sessions. So before I introduce our featured speakers, I'll introduce this week's lightning talk speaker who will kick us off. We have Kristen Swanson, who is a wonderful educator who helps teachers design meaningful interactive curricula at the local and national level. She's taught at the elementary level. She's served as a regional consultant for response to intervention, and she's worked as educational technology director for a school district in Pennsylvania. In addition to her experience as an educator, Kristen is passionate about meaningful professional learning. She's a founder and chair of the board of the EdCamp movement. She has shared her ideas and expertise at ACSD conferences, TEDx Ed, and EduCon. So welcome, Kristen.
Before I kick it off, how many EdCampers in the house? Woo! All right, thank you. So I'm going to give you 5 quick minutes of sort of my story and my journey and how that very, very small, inconsequential story has led me to find hundreds of other educators around the country that have really bolstered my thinking and learning and also sort of my understanding about empowerment. So today really starts with you. And when we think about equity and innovation in education, it has to do with you and what you have to share. And I think really what makes this special and what makes equity and innovation in pedagogy special is the fact that it's participatory, that we have reached a time and an age where we all have something very, very important to contribute. However, this is really driven by environmental cues. And so the environmental cues that we see all around us have a significant impact on the choices that we make and what the learning environments we thrive in actually look like. And I would be honest with you that every single person in this room, by default, is part of a pretty tumultuous environment, right? We are actually some of the only people going forward that will know pre-internet and post-internet world, right? We will be the last generation to know what it was like before Snapchat. Think about that for a minute, right? That means that we are in an incredibly tumultuous environment. And there are two routes that you can think about in the midst of tumultuousness when you're designing what that learning experience is going to look like. And the first place that we can go is fear. And that is often the first place we go because we're humans, and this is really scary. But I would tell you that when we start from a place of fear, the system usually looks like this. This is a TSA pre-check. That's not a super great experience for innovation and learning. And so I encourage you to think about every learning experience and environment and policy that you make as the anti-TSA pre-check, right? It's important. We need it. It does its job for that purpose and that moment in time. But when our students walk into schools, how can we make it feel like the opposite of this? And that was really the genesis of EdCamp. It was very informal. It was very loose. And it really started not with fear, but with a belief, a fundamental belief in others, an assumption of the positive. And, you know, if I were being really, really honest, this movement and this bringing together of educators that started with the belief in others was largely by accident. So you may have heard of this, you probably haven't, but EdCamp is part ed, part camp, and it really came about one Saturday when I was in grad school, 3,000 miles across the country, and something happened on that Saturday, and it was that class got canceled, followed by a sign that looked like this. Now, class canceled on a Saturday plus a sign that looks like this means that I'm pretty much going to follow that sign. And when I followed that sign, I ended up seeing this. And it was the most diverse collection of individuals I had ever seen buzzing around a giant board full of Post-its. It was chaos to my third grade teacher brain. It was absolute chaos. And of course, what does any good third grade teacher do in the midst of chaos? Jump in and find out what those shiny stickers mean, because I had to know. And at the end of the day, I ended up meeting 5 educators who came together and said, wow, 200 people showed up in a space. They posted what they wanted to learn about. They shook that out. They used the rule of 2 feet to find the spaces that worked for them. And it was the most incredible day of learning that we had all ever had. Now, this event was called BarCamp, and many people ask, no, it doesn't have anything to do with bars. It has to do with computer coding. And the reason that the unconference model worked so well and that chaos model worked so well was because things were changing so fast. And when these educators who ended up at this BarCamp event reflected on our experience, the one thing that we could all agree on was that things were changing extremely fast in our classrooms, and maybe, just maybe, this might work for educators. So we came up with these 5 tenets, and we invited people to fill up this blank schedule board in Philly. We had very significant budget. You can tell by our advertising budget there. And over the course of the years, we saw copycat events take us from a single event to truly a movement. And again, when we thought about this movement, and this is where we stand today with that many ed camps all over the country, we started to realize that this was something that was not only impacting us individually, but it was also impacting others. And so I encourage all of you to check out edcamp.org, connect with other ed campers. It's a great community. It's free. And it really speaks to the starting with a belief in others and making some magic happen. So thanks.
Wonderful. Thanks, Kristen. So now I'd like to introduce our featured speakers for the evening. We are delighted that Richard Culatta and Karen Cator are both former directors of the U.S. Department of Education EdTech Office are here with us tonight. They'll do some presenting, but they're also going to host a sort of a fireside chat and interactive discussion with you all, so please do start thinking about your questions that you want to ask them. Richard Culatta is currently Chief Innovation Officer for the state of Rhode Island, as well as a Design for Learning Fellow at IDEO. Richard is a leader in the field of educational innovation. He has experience in K-12, higher education, and workplace learning environments. Prior to joining the leadership team in Rhode Island, he served as the director of the Office of Educational Technology for the U.S. Department of Education, where he focused on leveraging technology to create personalized learning experiences for all students and promoting increased connectivity to improve access to education and make college more affordable. Prior to joining the Department of Education, he served as an education policy advisor to the U.S. Senator Patty Murray. And prior to joining the federal government, Culatta worked for Brigham Young University, where he was instrumental in redesigning the teacher preparation program at the McKay School of Education. He began working with educational technology at the University of Rhode Island, where he co-taught the university's first technology programs for faculty. Our other speaker tonight is Karen Cator. Karen is CEO and President of Digital Promise. Actually, you know what? I'll put the other pictures up here. We'll get that set in just a second. Karen, who's also doubling as IT tonight. Karen is president of and CEO of Digital Promise, a nonprofit whose mission is to vastly improve the opportunity for all Americans to learn by accelerating innovation in education through technology and research. From 2009 to 2013, she served as director of the Office of Educational Technology at the U.S. Department of Education, as Richard did, where she led the development of the 2010 National Education Technology Plan and focused the office's efforts on teacher and leader support. Prior to joining the Office of Educational Technology, Cator directed Apple's leadership and advocacy efforts in education, and she started her career as a teacher and then administrator in Alaska. Welcome, Karen and Richard, and we'll get your slides set up here. The
projector's not on.
It's on.
Oh, no.
But it's not working. No, no problem.
The first speaker broke it. So while we're waiting for that, I could just give you a quick sense of the Office of Education Technology, since you might not have ever really thought about it before. The U.S. Department of Education, has an authorization by Congress in the Education Act, and it names, like, there shall be an office of this and an office of that, and I think there are 29 of them or something. Office of Education Technology is one of them. It's actually a policy office that sits in the Office of the Secretary, and it started in about 1995. So it was instrumental in the beginning days of E-rate, lots of grant programs over the years, and other things. Oh, there we are. There you go. All right, let me get rid of these. Not that they're not lovely. So that's the Office of Education Technology. It's a small office. There's a director and several staff people that are career staff, and then usually we can bring on some political appointees in the office as well. The director and the leadership of the office are always political appointees, so they come in and leave with the administration. So Richard and I were both had the pleasure of serving Secretary Duncan since the beginning, and now neither of us are there, but there's another person, Joseph South, who is now the director. There you go. That was a fast description. You can ask questions about that later. I think this is my microphone, right? This is my microphone. I have two. All right. So what I'm going to do is also a lightning, just 5-7 minutes. Just give. Since the topic is equity and technology and learning, I thought I would just really do the very high level kind of how we see this space. And it's mostly probably not going to be things you don't already know, but it sort of level sets the conversation. So first of all, there are unbelievable pockets of excellence everywhere we go, and probably many of you in this room right here have classrooms where really amazing things are happening. We see kids of all ages doing robotics projects, STEM projects, coding, challenges, design thinking, learning about entrepreneurial mindsets, lots of very interesting things happening across the country in schools, all kinds of schools. We also see faculty members and teachers, again, at all levels, engaging students in design challenges, engaging students in thinking deeply, solving complex problems, thinking globally, building their competence. We also see young children who are beginning to build literacy skills, numeracy skills, by engaging with technology. Now, there's been a lot of research and a lot of work thinking through, like, what is appropriate for young children. And what we're really understanding now is that the notion of no screen time or X amount of screen time isn't really the right way to look at this, but rather what is happening on the screen. All screens are not created equally, and what's happening on the screen and what's happening around the students, it's what's important. So these are the kinds of things we see happening. We do see young children developing their language skills, learning how to make letters, lots of things by engaging with technology. So what we want to really make clear is any problems with education in America do not actually have to do with a lack of excellence or a lack of kind of collective vision. So within that context, technology is what's offering some incredible opportunities to learn. So we've always been able to learn from other people, right? So oral learning was as soon as there were people on the planet, you could learn from other people. And then, of course, math and graphics and the written language came into play. And as soon as you had the printing press, right, if you could learn to read, you could then learn from other people from books. And those people didn't have to be geographically close to you, not to overstate the obvious. And so now what we have is the Internet, which is exponentially faster, broader, deeper, and it is as compelling or more compelling than the printing press when we think about its impact on learning. So we have the Internet. So there are 8 boxes here I'm going to put up here, and just to kind of nail down what it is about technology that's important. Sometimes reporters who haven't really thought about this much will ask questions like, well, what does the research say? Does technology work? And my usual answer is, let's think about what you're talking about. Are you talking about the Internet? Are you talking about a word processor? Are you talking about a math program? Are you talking about watching a video? I mean, we have to really think deeply about what is it about technology that's helpful so that we don't end up making decisions and that we don't miss kinds of important things happening. So first of all, again, obviously, professional tools. Larry Ellison owns an island in Hawaii. He uses the same browser as a 4th grader, right? So we have professional tools that young children can use, people of all ages, and we share in those, whether it's photography, videography, creating animations or the like. So professional tools. The second is explanations, simulations, and visualizations of complex concepts, right? So the notion that you can see something, you can see the wind patterns across the country, you can see colors and lots of visualizations of data. Those kinds of things are incredibly compelling and allow us to ask and answer questions of all kinds. We have the simulations and those kinds of things on physics and other kinds of environments like that. Accessibility, I think, is probably one of the most compelling things that's kind of really coming into the forefront now. Apple's new commercial with the student with autism who is now communicating with his family and friends for the first time because he couldn't speak before, but now he can point to things on his tablet and it speaks for him using the Siri voice or whatever voice he would like. Really compelling. Absolutely augments human performance. It helps people do things they couldn't do otherwise, and those are the compelling things to pay attention to. The story of the student who graduated from Full Sail University with a degree, I think, in filmmaking and had spastic cerebral palsy could use a single switch and could learn how to edit film using a single switch. Again, a career and something she never would have been able to do without the access to the technology. Some of the simpler things, if you simply think about text on a screen that can read to you, right? That's really helpful if you don't know how to read.
It's also helpful if you're tired, if you don't know a word, if you want to click on something and have it defined and go deeper and that kind of thing. Accessibility technologies, I would say, are one of the main assets that we have as we are entering a world where there are more and more sort of complex profiles of students, complex learners with kind of these jagged profiles, so to speak. So feedback loops, right? Adaptive environments, really important. Primary source documents, access to books in the public domain, access to experts on every topic under the sun, the ability to participate globally, engage with people in other countries, begin to develop that sense of global competence, have virtual exchanges, see what's happening across the world through the eyes of many, many people, not just through the eyes of potentially perhaps a newscaster or a government, right? So global participation and connection. And finally, personalized learning. So personalized learning being you can do things at your own pace, right? And you also can have differentiated engagements. So again, the idea about accessibility and the ways that you can engage with learning in the way that's most helpful to you. And finally, we can also leverage interest and language and family and all of the kinds of things that make us who we are. So that's kind of 8 boxes, why technology is incredibly important, and this whole notion of equity and how we're going to actually build an equitable environment so everybody has the opportunity to learn, much like we thought about reading and the ability to access public libraries. That's where we are at this stage. So the problem with education is definitely not a lack of excellence, not a lack of ideas about technology. It is definitely a lack of equity. And we talk about this equity is now also fueled by what we call the digital learning gap, right? So parts of this I'm sure you've thought about. So for example, there's 3 parts to this. The first being access. So when you think about the traditional digital divide, having access or not having access, that is definitely one part of this digital learning gap. The second part has to do with participation, the ability. Are you digitally literate? There are actually about 100 million Americans right now who are not participating. That means they don't have a voice. It's not just that they don't have access to other people's stuff. It's also that they aren't participating. It's a participatory culture online, and they're not participating. They don't have access to government services. They don't have access to the kinds of information and everything that we all know is extremely helpful to us. So lack of access is 1, lack of participation is 2, or the gap, I should say. Gaps in access, gaps in participation. And third is equally important, is the gap in the use of technology, the powerful use. So this part is, we talk about powerful use being, are you able to inquire, ask good questions, do good searches, find what you need, engage with others, find those experts, have this text read to you? Can you use the technology powerfully for what you need to do, not for what it is telling you to do? So lack of powerful use. Those are the gaps. So what we're very focused on is closing the digital learning gap by improving access in school, out of school. Mobile has helped a lot, and we're really interested in some of the new technologies that are expanding broadband ability. Increasing participation, making sure in libraries, in community centers, in wherever people are, how can we improve the ability to how can we improve the ability to turn off our phone? No, I'm just kidding. No, I'm just kidding. It's Siri. If Siri wants to answer a question, Siri does that, right? Every once in a while, like, hey, what did you say? Yep, don't know. Anyway, participation is the second, building digital literacy and making sure people can actually know why and how to participate. And then finally, building powerful use. This is an important one because there has been research that shows the differentiation in income levels and the use of technology at home. And so the idea is that sometimes students in lower income environments use technology more for light entertainment, light communications, and are not using it powerfully to get their homework done or to do research or the kinds of things they were sort of, quote unquote, should be doing in terms of learning. And so the response to that should not be, so let's not give those kids technology. The response should be, so let's teach powerful use inside of our schools so that everybody has that access and that opportunity. All right, so what we're trying to do is close this digital learning gap. And Digital Promise is a nonprofit organization that was authorized by Congress in order to improve that learning opportunity for all Americans. So last thing, you've probably seen this. This has been kind of making its way around the internet, everywhere. This is an important distinction between equality and equity. So when we talk about equality, it's like everybody needs the same textbook. Like, all right, but that's actually equality, right? Not equity. It doesn't mean everybody can read at the same level. It doesn't mean everybody can access that information or can learn equally from that. So how do we build environments that are equitable, meaning every person has that level of opportunity and support that they need to improve their chance at a productive future? So there you go. That is my lightning talk.
Hi, everyone. Glad to be here with you. As Karen mentioned, I had a bit of I think an allergic reaction to a chemical that they were using in the rental car on the way up. So if you see me like squinting weird or like touching my head, it's actually not because the question that you asked was really strange. It's because I'm trying to keep from passing out up here while I adjust to whatever crazy chemical I got. So please bear with me on that. But I'm thrilled to be here with you tonight, and it's very exciting. It's always awesome to have a chance to be back working with Karen Cator again. I had the chance of, as she mentioned, working with her at the Department of Ed. Between the two of us, we pretty much covered pretty much the whole Obama administration for the technology ed tech space. And she really, we'll just say it this way, I would not have wanted to take that job were I not following Karen Cator. She really transformed that office and made it into sort of took it up a whole nother level. And I just got to help keep pushing forward. I want to talk a little bit about this idea of some specific ways that we should think about using technology to close equity gaps. One of my favorite quotes is this one from William Gibson: "The future is already here, it's just not very evenly distributed." And I believe that that's very true, and it aligns actually with what Karen was saying a second ago, that we don't have, it's not that we have a problem of not having solutions. The problem is that they're not distributed equally, and I think that technology has a key role to play in solving that. But I want to be clear about something. This is a weird situation where the very tools that can close these long-standing equity gaps that we have in our country are the same tools that can exacerbate them. And that's interesting. I was trying to think of an analogy, and I couldn't think of another example where the same tool that actually could solve the problem would make it worse. I don't know that there is one, but that's something that we have to be very cognizant of as we think about how technology is being used. So I just want to share quickly 5 opportunities that I think we can use technology to close equity gaps. And some are going to overlap a little bit with what Karen was just talking about, and I have a couple examples that I hope might be useful. So the first one is this idea of equitable access to learning materials. Something that's very interesting as you look at over time. So this is a chart. I know it's a little bit hard to see, but this is a chart that shows the cost of inflation. That's blue. So the chart on the bottom is cost of inflation. The line in orange is the cost of textbooks over the last 50-ish years, right? They have increased over 1,000%, right? And so we have this crazy situation where the cost of materials is so expensive and growing at an exponential rate. And so you have, this was an interview with a college student, Johnny Lazzarini. He said, when I look at the syllabus and it says required text, I think in my head, oh, that's adorable. And we have lots of information surveys at the college level, certainly, where nearly half the students just don't even buy textbooks anymore because they can't afford them. And at the K-12 level, you have schools that are more wealthy, well off, are able to refresh textbooks more often. Those that aren't use older, out-of-date textbooks because the cost is so high. So one of the opportunities that we have through technology is to close that, just once and for all, completely close that gap. There's this great thing called open educational resources, which hopefully you're all familiar with. It's the idea of openly licensed. By the way, I don't like the term open educational resources because people are confused about what that is. So I like to say openly licensed educational resources or openly licensed resources. And that's the idea of saying, instead of having to pay commercial license, let's just make them all free. One of the last projects that I launched before I left the Department of Ed was something called the Go Open initiative. And it's a pledge to have districts and states across the country shift, starting 1 year at a time, away from a commercial textbook over to using open licensed resources. We can save about $8 billion a year if we started using open license instead of commercial textbooks. And the slogan for that is, have your $8 billion back, education, right? That's the best I can, right? So there's a lot of money that could go back if we were able to simply make that shift. So that's one piece. The second one that I want to talk about is access to expertise. there is as you heard in the bio, I used to work for Senator Patty Murray, and one of the towns in rural Washington had a position listed, a math teacher position listed for 5 years. And it wasn't like this principal was being, picky. Like literally in this small town, they could not get a math teacher for 5 years. And so we have situations where, just the fact that you were born in that zip code means you're kind of out of luck when it comes to learning math. And that's not your fault. And so that's something that we need to consider. This is a town, this is a picture of a town called Polvidera, New Mexico. Secretary Duncan used to take these bus tours that Karen and I used to have to be part of. At first they were really fun, and then toward the end we're like, how do I get off this dang bus? But we would go and visit a bunch of places, and one of the places was Polvidera. The town population is 415 people, right? So think about what that school is like. And think about if you're a kid in that school and you want to take a foreign language or computer science. You're kind of out of luck. And so part of what's really interesting is what can technology use to close that gap? This is a different school. This is in Sunnyside, Arizona. And these students, I was walking up one day to the school, and I saw them standing there, and I said, what are you guys doing? Because I knew they were up to no good, messing around with some plant instead of being in class. And they said, well, actually, we're in our class. We're in our biotech class. And I said, what the heck does that even mean? And they said, well, we have this little device here, and we're taking samples, DNA samples of the indigenous plant life around our school, and we're working in partnership with researchers from a university that was not anywhere close by, and they were doing joint research and actually publishing. These students had a published article before they graduated from high school, making genomic structures of these plants, right? And I went, okay, good, you keep doing that, and I'll just kept on walking. But the point is that this is a way where technology closed that gap, because that's expertise that they did not have and would not have had at their school that they were able to have through technology. Number 3, access to personalized learning. Karen already talked a little bit about this one. It's just reiterating the point that all students are different, and so the fact that we treat them all the same is ridiculous. And the least equitable thing we can do is treat all students the same. We need to be realizing that they have different needs and passions and interests, and we have to adjust for that. This is in the National Ed Tech Plan. This is the 2016 version, which Karen created the 2010 version of the National Ed Tech Plan, which was a huge effort. Before her, it was like a pamphlet with bad clip art. And she transformed it and really came with a fantastic version. So then we just made some updates to it, which is what this one is here. But in it, there was a lot of buzz around personalized learning. And it started to get to the thing where I remember one time Karen and I were at an event and we announced a grant for personalized learning. And then we went down to the floor of that conference. And everybody had this stickers, our software supports personalized learning. And I'm like, really? Because yesterday it didn't. So either you just went and printed a bunch of stickers that said that it did, or and so we wanted to define this. So personalized learning, the way we define it in the National Ed Tech Plan is the pace of learning adapts, the instructional approach adapts, and that it's tied to interests of the learners. And I think that's key, because if you're not doing that, there's other things, there's great things, there's adaptive, there's individualized, but personalized learning needs to do those 3 things. And there's lots of great examples of what that looks like. We can talk about that more in a minute. So 2 more. This is opportunity 4, using tech to support decision making. I often talk about getting into higher ed in this country is a little bit like, ever see Pirates of the Caribbean? Do you remember the Isla de Muerta? And the whole deal was you could only get there if you'd already been there. Do you remember that? That's sort of like higher ed in the U.S., right? You can only get there if you've already been there. If you have parents that have been through the system, you're all right. If you're trying to do it the first time, it's kind of like trying to navigate to this island. And unfortunately, when you go to look for tools that can help students figure out how to do that, it feels a little bit like this. And so something that we really are pushing is that technology could actually provide tools that help make it easier for kids to navigate that process, and many others. This is just one that we created at the Department of Ed. It's a college scorecard, so you can see very quickly which schools were performing better than others and help make that decision as you're trying to decide what the heck school do I go to, usually with much less information than the movie that you choose on Netflix. Right? There's orders of magnitude more data that goes into that decision than the decision about what school students go to. And my last one is access to connectivity. There was a big initiative that hopefully you've heard of called ConnectEd, providing access to schools around the country that we worked on, and we're in good shape on that. Within 2 years, we should have almost all schools connected, which is a huge thing. But there's not... it doesn't stop there, I guess is what I would say, because if we're only able to get, there's actually 2 issues that I think we still have to address. One is the fact that you can connect schools, but if you get to the school and the school isn't providing devices for the students, then we haven't accomplished much. So I believe very strongly, and I feel like I need to be increasingly outspoken on this because I'm not hearing enough people talk about it. The idea of BYOD is wrong and frankly illegal. And I thank you, and I'm glad to hear some people say for that. It is a big problem. By the way, and let me be clear. It's not that I actually don't have a problem with BYOD. Every student should be able to bring their device. I have a problem if the school thinks that they can use BYOD as an opportunity to outsource their responsibility to provide access to students. That's the problem. Sure, everybody should be BYOD, but that's not the way to, it's sort of like, I was telling this to somebody who was like, how do I make this point? And I was like, well, what if we compare it to other things that are more obvious, like maybe bring your own textbook? Could you imagine, like, if you can afford a textbook, go get the textbook. Like, if you can't, maybe just read on over the shoulder of somebody next to you, or maybe buy an older version. And I know all the page numbers are different, but maybe you can figure it out, right? Because you got to bring your own textbook, or maybe I don't know. Maybe this may be a little crass, but maybe like bring your own toilet paper, right, to school or something. Like, if you can afford, I don't know, but like if you were to do that with any other thing, there would be lawsuits like crazy. Why on earth are we not calling this out? And I know it's hard, and I know new funding methods have to be considered. There's $8 billion we can get from stop buying textbooks. By the way, let's throw in copier machines and toner and paper, and we can probably buy 2 devices for every kid. So I don't really buy the fact that there isn't money to do it. I think there's just choices that we have to make in order to make that happen. And so that's one piece that I think we have to be cognizant of. And then the last piece is this thing that we're calling the homework gap, and finding creative ways to make sure there's access at home. This is a great example. And in fact, I think Daryl Adams was here as part of this series, right? Oh, is coming. Okay, well, I won't steal his story then. I will leave it just to say, you need to come. He's awesome. The quick version of what he did, and then I will leave it so that he can give you the details, is he said, if we can turn our buses into giant MiFi hotspots and go and park them around the city, we can actually have students connect from their homes to those buses as opposed to sitting in the parking lot of his school, which is what they were doing before. And he has a fantastic story that you'll hear when you come back. And so those are, I think, 5 opportunities, 5 areas where we can really make a huge impact through technology. Let me end with a quick video clip, a very short, it's about a 1-minute clip. And what this is we had, so when we were at one point we were starting to roll out the connected work at the White House, we said, I think we really want to have students sell this, not us, right? Make sure they understand why this. So we had this call, we had the Student Film Festival, we asked for students to say, why don't you tell us why technology is important? And they came in, we thought there'd be a couple hundred of them. We ended up having 3,000 videos that got submitted. So I went across the street, there's a little CVS across the street from the Department of Ed, from our offices, and I bought all of the Cheetos and Mountain Dew that I could find, and then my team sat there and watched 3,000 videos, watched them like over 24 hours a day for like a week, and watched these videos. They were incredible, incredible stories. But one of them ties back to this idea of how how technology can close an equity gap in the other way. So I talked about closing expertise gaps by saying, if you have students in a remote area, how you can bring in experts that aren't there, right? This is the opposite of that. This is a case where we had a student who was not able to participate in his schoolwork and was able to use technology to bring him in. And so I just wanted to end, since I think it's important to hear the student voice in all of this conversation, I want to end my little spiel here with a quick clip from Kyle. And then we'll have our chat. Here we go.
Hi.
Well, how about we put it on this screen? How do I get it on that screen? There we go. Let's see if that works. Let's go back just a little bit. Okay, ready? He just said hi. That's all we missed.
Hi, my name is Kyle Weintraub. I'm a 7th grader at David Posnack Jewish Day School. My Posnack experience is unique because I go to school through a robot. I am being treated for lymphoma in Philadelphia.
Arriving visitor, Kyle is about to arrive.
Without the robot, I would be in school without any interaction. I wouldn't see my friends. I wouldn't be doing much at all.
When I discovered that there was a student at our school that was diagnosed with cancer, I wanted to do something to help him stay a part of our Posnack family. I would raise the money to get a robot that would let him interact with his friends and still learn at our school.
I have been through a lot. This robot has really impacted me tremendously. Without it, I would probably not be in school. Without the robot, I would not have access to my old life, my friends, or my studies. Life would be awful without the robot. I have infinite gratitude for it.
I can honestly say that I truly think that it's the Vigo saving Kyle's life, because if it wasn't for the Vigo, we probably wouldn't have stayed here for treatment in Kyle. I don't know what would have happened. It really gave him the security and the sense of belonging and continuity that he needed.
Kyle has left the building.
And anybody been on a University Avenue in Palo Alto and seen that robot that comes out and talks to you? Yeah, I mean, that is exactly what works in a school. You know, you can have that, the student can drive their own robot into the school. We have actually one of those at our office, so we haven't done it for a while, but the office in DC can get the robot, which is in our office, and drive it to our office and sit there and look at us, talk to us. I'll say one quick thing. There was one really funny picture where somebody was on like FaceTime on a computer, and then you had the robot over here, and they were talking to each other, and we were in the room going, they're talking to each other.
Why are we
So there
here?
you go. Oh, I'm glad your energy's back. You seem back to Richard is so high energy, so this is awesome. I'm glad you're back. It'll be much more fun. So we're going to open up to questions from all of you. We could jump straight into that, or we also have for people who were here before, your exit tickets from last time. Some of the questions that you start with some of those. All right. All right, Richard. So here's one. How does the trend for blended learning affect communities of color in both potentially positive and negative ways? So there you go. We're talking about blended learning here, and this is a terminology between personalized learning and blended learning. I think everybody's like ready to scream and come up with a new technology. But so if we switched out the terminology and said basically, how does the trend for using technology for learning affect communities of color in positive and negative ways? Any thoughts on that?
So I think, I'll say one thing, and I think it'd be interesting to hear some of your thoughts, especially from some of your League of Innovative Schools where you've seen this actually happen in practice. But one thing that I would just say is there's some interesting, where Karen talked about it briefly, this, what we call in the National Ed Tech Plan, the digital use divide, right? So what we were seeing, unfortunately, is that in more affluent communities, which you would see that the way that technology was being used was to build and design and create, and that when you looked and saw how it was in largely poorer communities, the technology was used almost completely as a passive device, right? To just watch stuff, TV, games, that sort of thing. And so part of what I think it happens is as we're looking at using technology for learning and how it helps underserved communities, I think there's incredible benefit. I used to run a school in Latin America, and we watched how having technology in those schools completely transformed the opportunities that these kids had. But it was not the technology that did it. It was the fact that we were helping to retrain and rethink what you could do with the technology. And so I think that's the part we just have to be super clear about is just providing technology. There's some studies by some people who I will remain nameless who are like, all you got to do is just give kids technology because they're so smart they can just figure it all out. We don't teachers. What a difference do they make? That's bull. I mean, let's just call it out. That is not true. You have to have guidance around how to use it, and I think that's the key to whether it's going to make a difference in those communities or not.
Yeah, totally agree. I do admit I want to cry when I go to school and kids are all plugged into headphones, and they're definitely they're probably doing better on their math tests and reading tests. But it is a passive use of technology, and it's telling the students what to do. So. And I don't think that's not, I mean, in some ways that has to do with affluence, and in some places that's just simply people think that that's a really good use of technology. So I definitely think that's one of the things that's a problem. I think that, so when we talk about personalized learning, that is, and powerful use of technology and building agency and giving kids choices and really helping people become powerful lifelong learners, that is absolutely where we want to stay. So some of the conversation around blended learning is like, well, you can just use a rotational model, or you can just use the lab down the hall. And some of that conversation takes us back about 20 years. So it's a term that I don't necessarily use as a term of art, just because the whole notion of blended learning is confusing because it has these models, different models that are okay, and a lot of them are about rotating kids around onto things that tell them what to do. So yeah, that's
the best example of this, and I don't know how to, other than to see it, I think it's hard to know. I had a chance to visit, and there's many schools that do this. One of the League of Innovative Schools in North Carolina, Mooresville, I went in and I was looking at the school, which is by all other means a pretty traditional school. They have devices that they have for every kid, but traditional kind of rural southern school. And it just felt off. Something was just off. I mean, in a good way, but something was so different. I couldn't figure out what it was. And it was about the 5th classroom that I walked into that I went, oh, I know what it is. And I've spent my career in schools. I couldn't tell where the front of the room was in any one of those schools. Yeah. Because the kids were working on projects, and everyone, whether it was math or whatever it is, there was no front of the room. They were all working collaboratively together, and that was using that technology in a very powerful way. It's sort of the opposite of when you walk into a situation where you see what I call nexters. You know what nexters are, where you sit in front and you're like, next, 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 through this like screen, and then you get a little multiple choice test, and you pick the longest answer, and you move on to the next version of it, right? That's sort of the exact opposite of what the power of this technology can be, and so we need to be really.
And that said, there are just some amazing algorithms that are beginning that will actually augment teacher performance and help kids move along through problem sets or other things. So it does have its place, but within the context of powerful learning. There probably are some amazing researchers, I know there are here at Stanford and other places, that are really thinking about how to build powerful algorithms that actually support the individualized part of the personalized learning equation, but it isn't the whole equation. I think that's
right.
Yeah.
Totally agree.
Yeah, you want to ask a question? Oh, sorry, I forgot you were going to run around and ask for the microphone. Put you guys to work.
Hi, just a build on what you were saying about how amorphous the blended or hybrid learning is in terms of its definition, but it does include an experiential component. And what insights do you have on ways to evaluate, assess the learning that happens in that experiential component?
Oh my gosh, I'll start and you can jump in. So assessment, talk about another, being at the Department of Education, the A word, assessment. So two things. One is that, to be clear, the purpose of our standardized assessments in large part is to make sure that equity actually has some oversight, right? And therein sort of lies the problem, because unfortunately those things that you can test in a very high-level standardized way, those are the things that are what we're talking about, that are they're not the end game. They're not the be-all, end-all. We want kids to get beyond that to powerful learning and to solving complex problems and that kind of thing. So I think that so that's the first thing. So that assessment for accountability purposes is a real thing. The second thing, though, is when we do see powerful projects happening, a project where students are given a challenge like improve the use of water at our school, and then they work through that challenge, the whole entire experience is one assessment opportunity after another, right? You can assess their ability to communicate. You can assess teamwork, right? Do they work productively with others? You can assess their ability to think critically, to find resources, to answer questions, to find information, to use data. There are a lot of things that kind of fall into this. You can assess their ability to present something with multiple media types. Like, there are so many sort of assessment opportunities. The key, and actually Ray Pichon here at Stanford and at Scale and that whole group over there, they're working a lot on performance assessment, and it's, I think, one of the most important things that it's happening right now in the country is that people working on performance assessments that can, in fact, be, standardized is not the right word, but can be trusted as proxy for advancement and that kind of thing. It's incredibly important. I was talking with someone that was looking at, could we actually create portfolios? Could students have portfolios, and could they be used for college admission? And yes, and probably really much more easily at very small schools that have, don't get a lot of people to apply and that kind of thing. But my neighbor was at UC Santa Barbara. They had 78,000 applicants. There isn't a school that can look through 78,000 portfolios. So is there a way we can create a scoring system for portfolios that is trusted, rigorous, with inter-rater reliability and that kind of thing, so that we can begin to use much more interesting and creative types of problem sets? So speaking of innovation, we're talking about innovation here. That's innovation.
So +1 to what she said. That's hard to. I can't top that. The only thing I would add, though, is since you touched on the A word, I do want to mention. So I think we're in a tricky situation where we think about assessments and immediately think about these big, standardized, high stakes assessments, and there is a movement to sort of say get rid of those. And I want to caution against that. I think we have to be very careful. There is a hugely valuable purpose that they serve. Having been in a school, taught once in a school that was not, before some of this accountability was in place, and they had a very high rate of college acceptance, 90% or something like that, which is great. By all means, they're doing fantastically well, right? Until all of a sudden we had to have standardized tests that were cross-tabbed, and it found out that it was 100% of the white kids that were going in and 0% of the kids of color, because it was a small minority. And all of a sudden, that 90% didn't look so good. And that happened because there was some accountability. So I think there is value. I think what happened is we've gotten a little out of balance. And unfortunately, we've lost the value of what I would say is formative assessments, right? Those assessments that are happening continually all throughout the experience that aren't high stakes. The purpose of them are only to help adjust what happens next. And I think if we are able to keep that balance a little bit better, sure, yes, do a summative assessment to check and make sure everybody's lining up and on par. Of course you should do that, but it's not a surprise. I know yesterday and the day before and the day before and the day before exactly how you were doing. So nobody's losing their job. Nobody's surprised about it. It's just helping us to maintain equity. And I think that's a key that we should be thinking about when we think about assessments. That wasn't your question, but.
We could talk for a long time about any of this stuff. So here's another one. How can we ensure that technology integration is consistent throughout our students' academic career? That's a little easier, I think.
What does that mean?
I mean, consistent. So when I think about technology, I just think it's kind of like asking, how can we make sure that books are consistent throughout our students' academic career, right? By making sure they all have access, library cards, public, books. And so when I think about technology, I think again about the internet and about the professional tools and all of these kinds of learning opportunities with technology. So the way to make sure it's consistent is make sure that every student has access to their own personal device.
Something that just triggered. So on one hand, and when I did my little thing a second ago, I talked about the challenge with the BYOD thing because there's an access problem, but there's another one that what you just said triggered, which is it's not only an issue of not having enough students to have access to the devices. It's also an incredible instructional burden when you're teaching and you have 37 different devices and you're like, hey, let's do that. Oh, it doesn't work on mine because it doesn't support Flash. And oh, this doesn't because I don't have a data plan. And you're like, and teachers are like, forget it. All right, hey, let's pull out that worksheet again and go right back to that. So I think that's another piece of this that's key when we talk about consistency is also we're asking so much of teachers already, and we need teachers to be thinking about how to move into this space and take advantage of the technology. But man, let's make it a little bit easier for them. And one of that is just to make sure that there's consistency in what they're expecting as well.
Actually, that's funny because I always think too. It isn't a walk in the park when every kid has access to their own device. But if teachers can learn the skills of management, and it's managing a whole different kind of workflow and everything else. But if there is a lab down the hall or the cart that rolls in or the few in the classroom, that's a management nightmare as well because you're always trying to figure out who gets to use it when and for what, and you're just jumping, But if every student has a device, and then it can be used much more organically when, in fact, they need to find something out, work on some problem sets, write their papers or do their book reports, read their books, whatever it is, access is there.
What a funny idea computer labs are, huh? Can you imagine? Do you ever wonder, if an alien came down from another planet and was like, what is this thing? And you were trying to explain to me, well, we take the students out of where they're learning and we walk them down the hall to a room where they can get access to this device to learn, and then we delete all their work afterwards and walk them back. So they'd be like, oh, that's a really strange idea. Why on earth do you do that, right? I get, of course, why we have computer labs and when we were in a scarcity model, but I think that's another thing that I think we need to quickly transition out of is having the computer lab model. We're way past the time to have that go away.
Thank you. Hi. I think that I see two issues here, one of access and then the other of sort of quality. And I think that the case for technology for the sake of efficiency has been made. But even at Stanford, a number of researchers find that, you know, there's sort of a ceiling when it comes to what technology can provide in terms of cognitive depth. To use like the dated Bloom's taxonomy model, generally what's available with technology today really goes only as far as like explaining or describing. We can't really teach really, you know, what a teacher can do in terms of preparing students to evaluate things or to create. We're not at a place with that with technology right now, and I think even your example of performance assessment struck me because I thought maybe a lot of that could happen without, we can do performance assessment without technology. So my question is, what is your vision, or so what do you sort of make of the end point of where does technology sort of serve its purpose? And then at what point are we just kind of pushing something that has sort of come to its end?
Yeah, so I totally get your question, and I think a couple things. First of all, you know, with phones.
That's my stop being a workaholic alarm, by the way. On the East Coast, that's 7 o'clock, and so it's time for me to go home from work. So that was my alarm. We'll keep going now. Sorry for the interruption.
So that's a great question. That's a really great question. A couple things. One is for any technologies, I don't care if it's a car, a computer, a pen, whatever, we always have to ask ourselves what is amplified and what's reduced, right? So we do have to make choices and think carefully about what's happening with technology. That's the first thing. But I do think that, you know, I don't think of technology the way that you're thinking about it. I think of technology, number one, as augmenting human performance. It helps people by providing data, by providing access to information, by providing access to the expertise. So I don't think about the technology as what's going to bring people higher and higher on Bloom's taxonomy. At this point, I think about it, the teacher, the classroom, the people are pitching the challenge, you know, engaging in conversation, asking good questions, and then they use the technology to help them answer questions, publish broadly, communicate across distances, you know, get access to things they wouldn't have otherwise. So I don't necessarily think about that we're asking technology to do something that it isn't able to do. We're not asking the technology to teach the student. We're actually we're using the technology as a resource, as a guide. I'm not being very articulate.
Well, let me give an example of it. No, I think you're right. So, for example, I wish, wouldn't it be awesome if you could say everybody's thought bubble when you said technology, and I think you'd see things that would be very, very different. Yeah. So, for example, it was interesting in hearing that, and I can imagine what you mean by technology just by the way you asked the question. But what I was thinking of when you said that was this picture that I showed of these kids that had the researcher from University of Arizona that they were talking to, taking these samples and jointly writing this paper over Google Docs, right? That seems like pretty empowering technology. Is that not analyzing and higher level thinking and whatever we want to talk about? I think it is. And those kids would be completely out of luck if they didn't have technology to make that connection. So,
but it's not the computer telling them to think bigger thoughts.
It's what's connecting people. And we don't ask this, by the way, about other media.
It totally, we have to think carefully about this. We cannot jump in and just it's the panacea. Just as you said, we don't just give everybody technology and say, now you can learn. It is, again, there's so much, and teachers and, the learning opportunities are different. I do think as teachers, we need to create varied assignments. So I think the assignments and the tests and the things we did in the past without technology are very different than what we can actually have as engagements, learning engagements with kids when they have access.
So many different things. One, in a thought of mine to kind of just tag on to the other person's comment about Bloom's. I think we as educators really need to also work outside of the box. The same tool that can help resolve the issue can also be detrimental. And I think we're kind of shooting ourselves in the foot if we don't try to push ourselves. And so I came like an alien to Central Cal, where our school and district is supported by Google. So we're able to do so many innovative things with our students and portfolios, projects, where the kids are pushed to their higher, ability. And versus up in the city, very rare, do you find a computer lab. So I think that, well, I just appreciate all the conversations that you're having and things that you're pushing in our minds to push others. So.
Thanks. Yeah, equity.
I think it's key, and I think it's key that when things are working right, that we need to be sharing what's happening. So when you see examples of I think it's so hard if you've never if all the technology you've seen is sort of on, it's what we talk about, presentation, explanation technology, right? If it's just explaining a concept, that's very different than using it as a medium to collaborate or connect or design or build. And I think sharing those stories, when you have things that are working well, sharing those is incredibly important.
Because I'm not a computer person.
Yeah.
So I have to change my whole presentation and everything.
Yeah.
Hi, my name is Talia. Thank you so much for coming. And I'm interested to know, it sounds like both of you have extensive experience in several sectors, government, civil society, maybe a little bit of the private sector, and you were both inside schools. And I'm wondering where you think the change should come from. And also, if you see that these sectors are talking to each other about how to solve this complex problem together. Because a lot of the times it feels like, or at least even in this seminar, every speaker starts with their definition of the problem, of what is the problem with the education system, and their suggestion of what the solution is. And, each of us can think about how they define solutions and problems, but it sounds like we're not speaking in the same language necessarily. So if you experienced any cross-sector initiatives or communications.
So let me give a quick example, and then Karen should jump in on this, because I think cross-sector is really hard, and it's incredibly important that we figure out a better way to do it. It's interesting because it's not only cross-sector, but it's also even within sector we have these sort of silos. Districts collaborating with each other is one of them. I go to districts and I'm like, do you have any partnerships? Sure, we're partnered with these businesses and this university. I'm like, how about the district right across the street? Like, oh, I don't even know who the principal is over there. And you're like, oh, okay. Well, so I think there's these areas where we've gotten really comfortable in not collaborating. But let me just give one quick example. So in Rhode Island, in my new role as Chief Innovation Officer for Rhode Island, one of the first projects we launched was something called CS for Rhode Island. And it's a project to have computer science in every school in Rhode Island in 2 years. If we do that, we'll be the first state in the country to have pulled that off. And the way we did that, which is very different than what other states are doing, is we did it through public-private partnerships. So instead of saying, here's a law, you're required to do this curriculum, everybody go through it and do it, we came together, we went out and wrote MOU, public-private partnerships, with 5 different providers of different approaches for bringing computer science work into schools, and then brought everybody basically to a round table and said, here are your choices, did a little match.com thing to help them tee up with the ones that were right. And I think we have a shot at actually pulling this off. And I think the reason is because we use government in that case as a forcing function to get people to the table to work across silos. And I think we need like a bazillion times more of that for a whole bunch of different problems.
Yes. Yes, and we do. We absolutely do. One of the other examples, and Richard's familiar with this, Richard led work around education innovation clusters, of which Rhode Island is now an amazing innovation cluster. And the whole idea with education innovation clusters is that you cross-connect educators with researchers with entrepreneurs, right? So you purposefully connect these people together because together it's an explosion of power. It really is. And so an example of this is Pittsburgh. In the Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania area, it's probably like ground zero for like all of this kind of amazing public-private partnerships. They have over 200 organizations that are all in a club called Remake Learning. And what's their motto? They want to make Pittsburgh the best place to raise kids or something like that. And they call it Kidsburg. And so they have museums and like parks and over 200 organizations, and they have all the local school districts are part of this. I mean, it's an amazing organization, and it's very grassroots. Like everybody's part of it, but they know they're part of it. And so they're going to have Remake Learning Days for a week in May, and it's everybody. It's the entire community. It's businesses. It's foundations are funding all of this work. So I would say that's kind of an amazing example. And then I would just say, we also have the League of Innovative Schools, which is a club of school district superintendents, and the purpose is to work together. But we surround them also with entrepreneurs, and people are making, trying to dream up new products because we would like them to have access to real education experiences, and then also with researchers. So you're absolutely right. Breaking down the silos, connecting people together is the way that we're going to, I think, solve some of these problems.
So thank you for your presentation today. Last week at this same seminar, we heard the woman who's in charge of technology for the Santa Clara County School District. And one of the things that she said is that there were 4 people in the entire district. I think there were 3,000 teachers, and they had 4 people who could help them with everything from how do I turn on my phone, this kid's laptop isn't working, this teacher wants to learn how to create something innovative. And so I love hearing what you're doing in Rhode Island. What are you doing to make sure that your teachers in Rhode Island actually have people that they can turn to? What's the Department of Education doing to make sure that while this huge push is going forward for equity, that there are actually people available and resources available to make sure that that can actually happen, and that it comes down to the people in the trenches who are trying to make it work rather than great ideas that sound really promising but just currently aren't working in practice?
So I hear you. I do hear you. And like one thing that you said is just mythology we got to stop saying, and that's like teachers don't know how to turn on their phones. Like teachers are college educated, and a superintendent recently said, teachers, the teaching profession is the most educated profession on the planet, and yet we expect so little of them, and they expect so little of themselves. So the idea that teachers can't turn on computers or can't turn on phones is just mythology that we keep retweeting. We keep saying it, and I hear it everywhere. I mean, that's not, and so I'm sorry to pick on that little tiny piece. That said, I also think that there are 3,000 people that you just said. 3,000, so 3,000 people should all know how to do this stuff, not the 4 people that they have to call to say, fix my thing. We should have 3,000 people that know how to do that. And I do think technology, we are at the point where technology is not, we don't have an IT department at our work. We all help ourselves, or we help if hey, does anybody know how to do this thing or whatever. And not only that, but each of those 3,000 people have 30 kids hanging around. So the actual technical support part of it, I'm simplifying it, but the actual, if everybody has their own computer, probably, and they have the best practices in terms of spares pools, a pool of spares, if something actually doesn't work. We know how to do this now. But the model of thinking that those 3,000 people, can't help themselves, we have to figure out how to flip that model and make sure everybody is very self-sufficient, can help themselves. Now, then there's that entire layer of the network, which is incredibly important for some professionals, to make sure it's all working and that kind of thing. And Education Superhighway is a nonprofit in San Francisco that has kind of taken on this whole notion of let's make sure that every school has adequate connectivity and an adequate network so that teachers don't end up with problems like, everybody can't connect and that kind of thing. And I know you've done a lot of work on that as well.
I'm gonna build on that with 2 things. So one of them is I was doing an interview, sort of a podcast, and I said something which I didn't expect to be so controversial, and ended up sort of getting a lot of play around the interwebs. But I believe it very strongly. And somebody said, we were talking about leadership. It was a school leadership program talking about principals and superintendents. And somebody said, what happens if you have a superintendent that says, well, I'm just not tech savvy? And my answer was, we are well beyond the day where it's okay to say I'm not just tech savvy and be in control of a school, right? It is just not acceptable. The vision for how technology should be used in learning has to rest in the hands of the leaders. Now, of course, is there a CTO or CIO can help with the network and that sort of, yes, absolutely. But the vision for technology cannot be delegated. And if we still are in that mode, frankly, we have some superintendents that probably need to step down, because we can't have that. It just is not appropriate to have somebody who doesn't know how to use those tools. So that's the first piece that I would say. But the one other thing that I would add is it's also key that we push on the quality of the user experience
for the tools that we're expecting teachers to use.
Yes.
So I was in a classroom the other day, and I was watching they were trying to do something on some tool, and I was talking with the person who was building it, or one of the IT reps, I don't know who it was, but they were like, these teachers, old dinosaurs, don't know how to, grumble, all that language. And I said, oh, interesting, and because I watched after the class was over, and the teacher walked out, pulled out her iPhone, bid for something on eBay, posted something on Facebook, and I'm like, all right, wait a minute. What you just did there was like orders of magnitude more complicated than updating your grades in this tool. Let's go look at this tool. So we walk over and we look at the tool, and I said, hey, teacher, will you show me the tool? I'm like, yeah, what happens here? Like, well, it kind of works, but if I hit the back button, it logs me out, and I have like 18 different passwords, and it has all these screens that pop up. And the answer, the person that was talking about from the tech side, whoever it was, said, oh, we'll have to address that in PD. And I thought, PD is not an excuse for bad user experience, for bad user design. Could you imagine if like Facebook was like, oh, we'll just deal with PD because if you hit back, it logs you out of Facebook, right? Of course they wouldn't do that. They fixed the dang experience. And so I think on one hand, we have to realize that our educators do have to step up and say, no, this is about us. We own the vision for technology. On the flip side, as a community, we need to really push to not accept tools that just don't have, that just have a horrendous user experience.
Totally agree. Totally. I think we're up there.
Hi. I'm actually one of the few guys that's a school board trustee. So I appreciate this. The guy that talks about BYOD you should kill it anytime it comes up. I agree with that. And the other thing is, if you have a superintendent who says they aren't into technology, then the board needs to ask that person to retire. And you need to put political force in that. I saw you had Coachella Valley up there. That's a very interesting thing, because in California, we're the only state that builds schools with local school bond money. And Coachella Valley is one of the few school districts that has a school bond that is for buying technology, and it's in a very poor farming area down in Southern California near Palm Springs. Do you know how well they're doing on that? Because they're trying to do one-to-one, and they're not doing bring your own device. I assume they're doing with Chromebooks and store stuff in the clouds. And I wonder if you would talk about that some, because that's in the last 2 years, that's made an extremely big difference in my school district about our teachers down to the second grade, because the third graders need to know how to start to type things in for the Common Core test we're using. If you have any
So the superintendent from Coachella, he's actually, Darrell Adams, he's actually part of our League of Innovative Schools, so he's a member of our group. And someone said he's going to be here in 2 weeks, so you should bring those questions and ask him then. Otherwise, we could talk for him. I don't know what he uses, but I will say one thing about devices. Devices come and go, right? So we can't get too worried about what exact device people are using. And if we focus on learning, it's that we get the devices and the technologies that are going to support the learning goals that we have. I also was just reflecting, neither one of us work for government anymore, so we can say whatever we want.
Isn't it great? You can tell I'm really holding back.
I'm like, tweet him.
So one thing, too, that I'll share, and in fact, if it's helpful, I can send you the link and send it around. But before I stepped down from the Department of Ed, one of the things I realized is, as you've heard from both Karen and I, there's so much great stuff happening around the country, and it's so hard to know about. Like, you just don't know all these great things. And I had this moment one day, as I know I was getting sort of near the end of my tenure there, and I thought, I've had this wonderful, unique experience to see this cross-section of all these wonderful schools that other people don't get to see. And I sort of felt like it was my responsibility to help share that. And so one of the last projects that we did is we got some funding, and we went out and created 50 videos, short little video clips of awesome districts in schools across the country that they're all like 2 to 3 minutes each, that just share examples of amazing things that are happening. One of them is an interview with the folks at Coachella, not just the superintendent, but others. And so if it's helpful, I can share the link to those, because you can go through and see, and they'll give more detail about that and other programs where they're doing really good stuff with technology.
Yep.
Hi. I have a question about equity versus equality that you talked about earlier. So one thing I've noticed is that, for a lot of minorities, as you mentioned, technology doesn't have as big of an impact because of environmental cue. And I've also noticed like a big gap in terms of, inspiration. So it's kind of hard for kids to believe they can do things if they don't see anyone like them who have succeeded. Yeah. And then you also have the fact that oh, what's happening at home. So you don't have two parents who had a PhD in computer science from Harvard. So I'm curious to know what insights you've learned about how to create an environment in the school where the same technology can actually have, a large impact specifically for minorities, however you define that, but specifically for those groups for which there's a social context that makes it so much harder.
I mean, there definitely, again, are stories. The one that pops straight into my mind is down in Southern California, Vista. We have, so you talked about Connect Ed. So Connect Ed was the big project out of the White House that not only worked with the FCC to update E-rate, but it also was these $100 million investments or commitments from multiple companies. So, Apple, Microsoft, Adobe, a bunch of companies. And Verizon was one of them. And so Verizon works with Digital Promise, and we're working right now with 46 middle schools specifically on deep use of technology. So every student has a tablet and a data plan. So they have inside of school, outside of school, and the superintendent and the teachers talk on and on about how this has changed the lives of many of their students. And just for example, I mean, we don't think about students not only that, maybe live in low-income situations, but students who are homeless, students who go to a different home every night, students who are in foster care or migrant students. These are students who now have their own learning device and data plan. So wherever they are able to get online and do their homework. Again, what I see in these situations is not that, so I've been in schools also many times in low-income environments where they do have, where the technology is primarily used to drill and math and that kind of thing, which, again, is better than the next alternative, which is nothing. But again, in the schools we work at, again, we look for those kind of powerful uses of the technology where students are able to ask questions, find things out, follow their own lines of questioning, and learn things. So that's the school that I think of immediately with respect to students. There are definitely. So one of the other things that I would say, one of my big takeaways from the Department of Ed is it is a big, wide country, right? So what works in, Coachella isn't the same thing that'll work in inner city Detroit or in Piedmont, Alabama, or Sitka, Alaska. It's a big, wide country, so everybody has to think about their own context and what works. So in some places in this country, you couldn't put a tablet in a kid's backpack and send them home, right? It wouldn't be safe. But there are other ways of solving the problem of in school, out of school. So
I'd also say just one other piece that I would add to that too is in the places where I've seen this done really well, it's almost always involves some sort of training for families.
Yeah. Right.
And so it's when, in order to get your device, you have to come and sit down and we talk through it and what this is, because that's really helpful for them to understand, like, what is my kid, not only what are they doing, but like, what should I expect them to do? Because a lot of times you have parents who never had access to a device and they're like, I don't know, he's sitting there clicking next on the thing, maybe that's what it's supposed to be. And so they have some orientation that's like, no, actually, like, here's what it's supposed to be. It's supposed to be used to, you should see them connecting with other students, you should see them working, whatever it is, right? I think that's really important. And I think another piece that is, it's important in all schools, but I think particularly in schools where there may be less support from parents and families, is to talk through the idea of digital citizenship. Like, what does it mean to be a good digital citizen online? And I don't just mean like, don't steal stuff, right? Yes, you should not steal stuff. But I think about, like, how do you connect and collaborate? Mm-hmm. When you're working together on a document, when is it okay to delete somebody else's stuff? When is it? How do you organize people around a good cause in a digital space? When I was teaching, you'd organize somebody by making posters and sticking them up on the wall, right? That's probably like the least effective way to organize for a good cause now. Would be doing some sort of Google form to sign up for something and then to whatever it is. But just talking through and overtly teaching how are you a good, effective citizen in a digital space is incredibly valuable as an empowering tool for students in some rough areas.
You know, you just reminded me of something, too. The Joan Gans Cooney Center and partners did some research that was really interesting about two-generational models. And so students bringing a tablet home, it's in many cases the family's first home computer. So the students are actually mediators of learning in the home with either siblings or even their parents. So there are just some interesting things happening there as well.
This is a sort of a policy and research question, so I was hoping you can tie these two together. One is that some states and districts are now requiring that students take an online class in order to graduate from high school. So I was wondering sort of what are some of the, in Florida being sort of a big example as a state that's requiring kids to do that. So what are some of the pitfalls of sort of, I guess, making policies like this? And then from a researcher perspective, as a PhD student, as I look to try to understand the effectiveness of a policy like this, what do you think I should be thinking about?
Ooh.
Good question.
That is a good question.
Yeah. You want to start?
I think the one thing I would say, and then I'm going to make a snarky comment afterwards, but one that I think has some value. I do think I'm a little worried. I think there's actually good intention. I don't know what's in the minds of the people who made those policies. I think there's good intention in that, but I do worry about being prescriptive in the approach through policy. And I know that only from the painful situation of sitting in, working in the Senate, working in the department, and seeing policies that I'm sure made sense 20 years ago that are still on the books, and we're going, what on earth were they thinking? And so, forcing an online, I'm a little worried. I would rather say I think policy is better at putting a goal instead of a means. So what's the goal? Is the goal that you are, increasing collaboration with students around the country? Is it that you're increasing math proficiency? I don't know what it is, but I'd rather that policy focus on goals and be sort of loose on means, because otherwise, those means are going to change, and you'd hate to be stuck in having to deliver an online course if you don't need to anymore. So that's my quick response. Mm-hmm. The thing that I would say, this is my sort of snarky thing, but I believe there's value in it. The part that is a little crazy to me is not about requiring students to take online courses, but that in schools of ed, in departments where we're training pre-service teachers, we are not preparing teachers to teach in an online space. And that is crazy to me, because at some point over their career, you're going to have the opportunity to mediate in some form or another an online learning experience. And to not prep them for that, to not give them that tool in their sort of quiver, then they are really at a disadvantage. And I think it's going to be key as we rethink the role of teacher prep institutions moving forward, that there is some, that's where I think we should require there that at least some portion of the teaching experience has been practice teaching in an online space.
Yeah, I would just add to that and say that I agree. I think the policy was for good reason. I think, if the idea is we do want students to be powerful users and know how to help themselves and learn something in an online space, I can sort of see where that's coming from. The problem is the online course they had to choose from were probably not better than the next best alternative, which is their teacher in their school. I do know Piedmont, Alabama, speaking of Piedmont, Alabama students now have access to all sorts of courses that they wouldn't have had access to otherwise. So in that case, it's really powerful. But in the case of everybody has to take an online course for the, whatever, just before they graduate, that just seems again, sort of a policy made in broad strokes without taking into consideration all the various contexts. In terms of research, focus on outcomes. Like, ask what were we trying to accomplish anyway? And so if what they were trying to accomplish is have students successfully complete a course, then you can measure completion. But I think you always would want to find out the so what happened as a result. Did they learn more than, again, the next alternative? An interesting, the one that pops into my mind is Candace Till, who's here at Stanford now, did the research on the statistics course. And I haven't thought about this for a couple of years now, so I won't get it right. Go find Candace and ask her about it. But she basically did research on a statistics course that had various levels of online engagement and interaction. And they were trying to figure out what are the appropriate uses for the online environment, and can you dial down the amount of time the teacher is talking at the students and dial up the engagements, interactions online, and what's the appropriate level and measure of both. It's actually a very well done research study, and people have been talking about it for a long time. So that would be a good example of where something was done well, research was done well there.
Are we out of time?
Thank you. Yes, we're out of time. If we can give a round of applause to Karen and Richard. Thank you so much. All right.
And thank you. Can I just say, and thank you for coming. I mean, this is it's so important that you're part of this conversation. I believe so strongly, and I can give lots of stories afterwards. While I will bore you to death with them, but that technology is the most powerful lever we have for closing long-standing, persistent equity gaps in our country. But it only happens by people like you being part of these conversations and figuring out how to do it right. So truly thank you for being part of this conversation.
Yes, thank you, Richard and Karen. And also, you'll be able to continue the conversation with our campfire chats. But first, before your ticket to the refreshments, if you can complete our exit ticket, which is at bit.ly EDF Equity. And so go ahead and grab that URL. Next week, we have another exciting seminar planned. Karen was mentioning earlier building powerful use, and web literacy is one of these. And next week, our topic will be web literacy as a barrier and pathway to equity. If you have not signed up for the session already, we encourage you to do so, and you can register at the course website. Okay, so I'm really excited. 3 of the 4 of Elizabeth, your team is here tonight, right? So Elizabeth and Santa Clara County Office of Ed, they are back this week, and they will be leading our campfire chats during the reception hour. And so the campfire chats, again, are a space we're creating to continue the conversation. We have some fantastic topics tonight. We'll be talking about personalized learning, project-based learning, supporting English language learners, as well as also teacher-driven professional learning. And so I want to thank our facilitators. If you could please stand. We have Karen, Elizabeth, Martine, Kyle, and Robert. These are our facilitators. Thank you. So I encourage you, after you grab your refreshments, take a seat at a table and join in on the conversation. One other highlight I wanted to share is that we have the team from Mindshift. Stories Teachers Share is a great new podcast, and they're here to record your stories, educators. So they have a table right here. After you grab your food, please stop by the table, and you can set up a time to share your story. So we have a lot going on. Take a break, 10-minute stretch break. Thank you so much for being here. And again, looking forward to seeing you participate in a campfire chat, and we'll see you next week at Education's Digital Future, Equity by Design.